Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today, we are going to explore the question, is Jesus God? Jesus is undoubtedly the most influential person in the history of humanity. Even after 2,000 years of his death, he is present in almost every corner of our day-to-day life, from Christmas and magnificent churches to the laws which guide Western society. 1/3 of the world's population claims to worship him in one form or the other. However, the relevant question is who this Jesus is. Was he a great teacher, or a rogue preacher, or a revolutionary, or a prophet, or an ordinary person, or God who became man as most Christians believe it? The historicity of Jesus is well documented, much more than any of his contemporaries. We know that he was from Galilee in Israel, and led an ordinary life, except for the last few years, when he went around the present-day Israel and Palestine, also called the Holy Land, preaching that the kingdom of God was at hand. He had many followers, and chose 12 of them as his students or disciples. He died pretty young, in his 30s, and his death was through Roman crucifixion like a criminal. His death was supposed to be the end of this Galilean, but his followers began to claim that he rose from the dead after 3 days. They believed that Jesus was the long-awaited Messiah or the Christ, prophesied in the Jewish scriptures. They began to go around and proclaim his resurrection from the dead, and spread his message. His disciples went from Israel to Africa, Europe, the Middle East, and India. They were even ready to die for Jesus. The missionary zeal of the followers of Jesus has been so great, that today Christianity and its influence are visible everywhere on the planet, except for a few places, where it is forcefully suppressed. So, it is important to ask who Jesus was to these people. They lived with Jesus, and learned from him. If they were ready to go around and die for him, they must be convinced that Jesus was more than an ordinary man. In fact, their writings show their utter conviction that Jesus was divine. It is from this conviction and the belief in his resurrection that Christianity originates. However, this conviction brought so many questions. Some of these questions are, if Jesus is divine, was he not a human being? Or if Jesus is God and he himself prayed to God, is there more than one God? Early Christians struggled with these questions. Although there was a consensus on these questions with time, the last few centuries have given birth to some churches that differ from mainstream Christianity on matters of the nature of Jesus. Catholic Christians from the mainstream Christianity believe that Jesus is God incarnate, who is truly both God and man, a faith we share with Orthodox and the majority of Protestant Christians. We believe that Jesus is the Son of God, the second person of the Holy Trinity, the Godhead. Nevertheless, there have been several heterodox beliefs around Jesus. Some believed Jesus was only a mortal like any of us, whereas some believed he was God, who appeared like a man, but never was a man. Muslims believe that Jesus was a prophet, not God. Docetists, on the other hand, believed that Jesus was God, and his supposed incarnation was merely an illusion. Nestorians believed that human Jesus and divine Jesus were two distinct persons, while Arians believed that Jesus was the Son of God, but did not always exist like God the Father. There have been several more heresies around the nature of Jesus. Today, you must be familiar with at least some of the denominations that hold on to the heterodox faith regarding the divinity of Jesus. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus is not God, but Michael the Archangel, who became man. Mormons, or the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, believe that Jesus had an origin, but himself a God, distinct from God the Father. They believe in the Trinity, as three distinct gods, united in purpose. I will talk about their belief in another video. Unitarians, on the other hand, believe that Jesus was not God, but a great teacher or a prophet, who was inspired by God in his moral teachings. However, if you are a Bible-believing Christian, you must be familiar that there is only one God. This is probably one of the most fundamental teachings of the Bible. We know that the Father and Jesus are distinct persons, and the Father is God. If that is so, is Jesus God? Let's look at what Jesus himself taught about it. Firstly, we see occasions where Jesus indicates that he may not be God. In John chapter 14 verse 28, Jesus says, "Father is greater than I." Jehovah's Witnesses quote this, and say that Jesus is inferior to the Father, and hence, not God. Is that so? Let's look at other places where Jesus talks about the matter. In John chapter 10 verse 30, he says that he and the Father are one. He claims that he has the authority to raise the dead and forgive sins, which the Bible teaches that only God can do. Jesus claimed several times that he is the I Am, God's holy name which God himself revealed to Moses in the burning bush. Jews understood this and tried to kill him several times because he claimed himself to be God. In fact, it is this claim that led to his crucifixion and death. What else does the Bible teach about it? In the book of Revelation, we read that Jesus is the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. This is a title reserved for God in the Bible. In the book of prophet Isaiah, God the Father says that he is the first and the last, besides him, there is no God. Secondly, prophet Isaiah calls Jesus everlasting Father and eternal God. However, the most important passage might be from the first chapter of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Here, St. John calls Jesus the Word, and says that Jesus was with God, and was himself God. He also says that Jesus was with God in the beginning. That means Jesus is God, and was with the Father from the beginning. Then, why did Jesus say that Father is greater than him? Let's look at what the scriptures say. John, later in the same chapter, says, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us." St. Paul writes, "Christ humbled himself lower than angels, by becoming a man, and living the life of a man." And again, though he was in the form of God, Jesus did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. Here we need to understand that in Jesus is God who becomes man, the Creator becomes the creature. So comes the Catholic doctrine: Jesus is the eternal Son of God, who became a human to save us. Although one person, he has two natures, divine and human. He is, at the same time, fully God and fully human. Jesus, as a human, is inferior to God the Father, but as God, co-equal with the Father. So, if Jesus is God, does it mean that there is more than one God? No. Christian doctrine on Trinity professes that there is only one God, but three divine persons. Is it confusing? In that case, please check out my video on the Trinity, where I explain how the belief is, in fact, monotheistic and logical. Thanks for watching. If you like the video, please share it with others, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. God bless.